In our last lesson, we began the period that is commonly called the United Kingdom period. Today, we will learn why it's given that name. We introduced Saul, the first king of Israel, and told of several acts of faithlessness that would lead to his kingdom being given to a more faithful successor. David was anointed, but would not begin to reign until Saul's death. In the meantime, he serves as a musician in Saul's court. All these narratives are found in the book of 1 Samuel. When Goliath first saw David, he was angry that someone so poorly equipped could dare come out against him. But David approached him in the name of the Lord. He placed a stone in the shepherd's sling, whirled it around and let it go, hitting Goliath in the forehead. Goliath fell down dead. David became an instant hero and celebrity. He married the king's daughter and began leading military campaigns as commander over the armies of Israel. The Lord brought him great success. His fame continued to grow with each victory. The women of Israel chanted in celebration, "Saul has struck down his thousands, and David his 10,000s." Saul began to look at David differently, as a rival rather than just another young military leader. As Saul seems to have become increasingly mentally unstable, his jealousy over David's popularity became an obsession. Saul went as far as to try to kill David, even though David was now his son-in-law. To complicate matters, Saul's son, Jonathan, became David's best friend and blood brother. When Saul's rage turned against David, Jonathan plotted with his friend to help him avoid being killed by Saul in a fit of anger. David had to flee from his master. He and a few loyal men went in and out of hiding as Saul's anger waxed and waned. He was often on the run and in the wilderness, often hungry and thirsty. In fear of his life, David even found refuge in Gath, Goliath's hometown. He had to pretend he was crazy in order to prevent being captured and killed by the Philistines. David had multiple opportunities to kill Saul, but refused to do so because he was the Lord's anointed king. When Saul's life was spared, he left David alone for a period of time until Saul's obsession overcame him again. After the death of Samuel, the Lord was no longer helpful to Saul. David, on the other hand, continued successfully against all of his enemies. While hiding among the Philistines, he defeated the Amalekites. The Philistines feared David and sent him away. They went up to battle against the Israelites, against the army of Saul. Both Saul and Jonathan, along with two of Saul's other sons, were killed in the battle. Saul's death marks the end of the book of 1 Samuel. Rather than rejoicing over the death of Saul, as might be expected, David mourned the loss. And, of course, he mourned over Jonathan, too. He was then anointed a second time, this time with greater ceremony as king over Judah, the prominent tribe of the southern kingdom. The northern tribes, on the other hand, took Ishbosheth, Saul's remaining son, and made him king. As an effort to resolve the dispute over the throne and unite the kingdom, the military commanders, Abner, Saul's captain from the north, and Joab, David's captain from the south, came together and let their men fight a proxy war. As a result of this brutal conflict, David's men under Joab were the clear victors. This began a period of civil war between the loyalists of Saul and David that resulted in David's throne being confirmed throughout the land. So David's power was consolidated and his military strength was great. He proceeded to conquer Philistia, Ammon, and Syria, so that all the major military powers around him were no longer a threat. Israel was now at its peak of power, and other nations paid them tribute so that their wealth was increased. The Lord was with David in all that he did. Throughout this series, we have emphasized how God chose to do great things through ordinary, fallible people. David began as a shepherd and suddenly found himself as the Lord's anointed king and as a great warrior. The Lord referred to David as a man after my own heart. If this was all we knew about David, we might think more highly of David than we should. Because, you see, even though he was handpicked by God for a great and noble service, David was as fallible as you and I. In chapter 11 of the book of 1 Samuel, David was up on his rooftop late in the afternoon, and from there saw a beautiful woman bathing. Despite the fact that the Lord had blessed David by this time with several wives of his own, this woman was the wife of Uriah, one of David's valiant fighters. Without regard to this fact, David summoned her and lay with her. The word came back to David that she was pregnant. This began a great cover-up. An attempt was made to put the woman with her husband so the child would appear to be his. But because of Uriah's dedication to his army and the Lord's cause, David was unable to put them together. The only solution left to David was the unthinkable. He instructed his army to abandon Uriah during a fierce battle, leaving him alone to die at the hand of the enemy. So David, in a matter of a few months, went from being the faithful man after God's own heart to being both adulterer and murderer. God sent his prophet Nathan to speak to David, and through a touching parable showed him what he had done. The prophet went on to tell David the consequences of his actions. There would be violence among David's household. His love child would die, and his wives would be taken from him and given to others, publicly. David fasted and prayed that God would not let the child die, but he died anyway. Once the child was gone, David ended his fast, saying, "Now he is dead. Why should I fast? Can I bring him back again? I shall go to him, but he will not return to me." Then David comforted his wife, Bathsheba, and went into her and lay with her, and she bore a son, and he called his name Solomon. This Solomon would grow to become the next king after David. So, all at once, David has begun to see the consequences of his sin, and yet God is already preparing for Israel's future and for David's posterity. What grace! God has promised to establish David's throne forever, and he did so despite David's great sin. He even did so through the very woman with whom David sinned. For the remainder of David's life, he will continue to be successful in his military campaigns. But, just as the prophet of the Lord had said, he began to have power struggles among his own family members. Even one of David's own beloved children turned against him and sought to usurp his throne and his wives. Not only was David a powerful military leader, mighty king and man of God, he was also among the great prophets and poets of Israel, having written almost half of the Psalms written in the book of Psalms. Among them are some world favorites, including Psalm 23, "The Lord is my shepherd." Also among the Psalms of David are some prophecies of the coming Messiah, including Psalm 22, which includes the famous words of Jesus on the cross, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Prophecies told that the Messiah would come back to Jerusalem and sit on the throne of David. Jesus was, in fact, a descendant of David through his son Solomon. This gives him the right by lineage to sit on his father's throne and rule over his people, Israel. But not only does Jesus rule over the Jews, who are Israelites by birth, but also those who are children of Abraham by faith. That includes all of us, Jews and non-Jews alike. The book of 1 Samuel ends with the death of David. His life is recorded not only in 1 Samuel, but also in the book of 1 Chronicles and in the first two chapters of 1 Kings. Today we have introduced the period in history of Israel called the United Kingdom period, and given brief sketches of its first two kings, Saul and David. It would be after the death of David's son Solomon that this period would end abruptly, and the kingdom would divide north and south as it attempted to do at the beginning of David's reign. We will call that period the divided kingdom. Join us again next time, won't you?